they asked me for a fun fact, and you know, sometimes that's an icebreaker. What is something nobody would expect about you or know about you? And you know, I don't really look like the kind who would be backstage at a Kiss concert, but I was clear back in the 70s when nobody really knew who Kiss was. My boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, he worked at a local store in Lincoln, and they were a ticket broker, and somebody had stolen some tickets to this Kiss concert. So he had to be down there to try to catch them. And he called me and he said, "You have got to see this." And I said, okay. And he said, "Come to the back door, I'll let you in." Well, me and every other groupie in the world, you know, so I'm back there, but he does let me in, so I got to see Kiss from backstage. So that's my fun fact, not too exciting. But thank you for being here at this early morning. I know you have to do this and then get on to work. So I am excited to be here. I think I've got some good information, and I was talking to Judy Mitchell and saying I was so glad it was a human resources group, because normally I don't get all human resources professionals, but this is the group that I can kind of get down in some of the details, and as the group that's tasked really with talent management, there are lots of things that we can do to make our organizations better for that. So unconscious bias, you may have heard it with the term implicit bias. Sometimes it's that way. Sometimes it's called second generation bias. And it's like we've gotten through the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, and we're still, as organizations, not meeting our diversity and inclusion goals. And so it's like, what is the deal? Why not? If we're going to assume good intentions on most organizations' part, and they say they want this, but it's not happening, and not happening at a true systemic level. So the business case has been made. And you know, anyone who's still taking time to try to make the business case, we don't need to. We know that diverse and inclusive workforces demonstrate all sorts of good results. And even more specifically, organizations with diverse leadership. And that people are much more likely to see their ideas go forward. There's more diversity of thought. And the bottom lines are just better. But it's still not happening. And so now there's a whole new generation of research out there about why. And one of the things that's come out is at an unconscious level, consciously we have good intentions. And consciously we want these things to happen. But there is a whole level that we as individuals and also as organizations aren't really even aware of. So the second part of my presentation, we'll talk more about what we can do. But the first part is about that unconscious layer. So it's like, well, if it's unconscious, we can't do anything about it. And so I want to spend the first part of the presentation really talking about our brains and how you really can't trust them. And even though we think we're incredibly intentional, rational people, we're not. And it is fascinating. So, when I look, we were looking for a home a while back, and I love the older neighborhoods and with the trees and everything. But what's interesting about them, if you go into a house that was built in the 60s or whatever, the kitchens are really small, the rooms are chopped up, there's maybe one garage, and it's just not suitable for the way we live today, even though structurally it may be very sound. And so what do people do? They go into these neighborhoods, they start knocking down walls, bouncing out the back, kind of redesigning. And if you look at and think about your own organization, the organization where I spent the bulk of my career was Woodman Life downtown. And I mean, it's 126 years old. But most of your organizations are probably at least 30, 40, 50 years old. And if you think of the way homes looked then, well, organizations were built for the workforces of the 50s and 60s. And that's not who we are today. And it doesn't work anymore. So now to get to my brain thing here. So there is so much interesting information coming out about how our brains work with neuroscience and functional MRIs and all of those kinds of things. It's really interesting. Now, many years ago, Freud actually talked about our subconscious mind. And he said our subconscious mind was like an iceberg, that most of it's covered up in your subconscious, and there's a little bit on top that is conscious. He had the right idea, but neuroscience nowadays are saying he didn't go far enough. Rather than an iceberg, our conscious mind is more like the snowball that's on the tip of the iceberg. Very little of what we do consciously. Most of it is unconscious. And I want to just give you a few examples. There was a study done, it was actually done in England. And what they did is they went into a wine store and they put a display, two displays that were equal, towards the front, same prices, etc. One was French wine and one was German wine. And then they played background music on alternate days, like the Muzak that you're not really even aware of. And on even days, they played German music in the background. And on alternate days, they played French music. Again, kind of Muzak. What was really interesting is, as you can probably see where I'm going with this, is on the days when they played the German music, 75% of the wine that was purchased was German. And same when they played French music, 75% of the wine that was purchased was French music, or was French wine. And it was interesting, they'd interview the people as they came out of the store and ask, why'd you buy that wine? And only 14% of the respondents were even aware there was music playing. The rest of them didn't even know that, but yet they were doing that. Now, if you ask them, did you buy this wine because they were playing French music? Of course, they'd say no. But again, it's operating under their level of awareness. They've also found, so if you own a wine store, that people will buy more expensive wine if you're playing classical music versus if you're playing pop music or rock music. So just those unconscious impacts on us really show that we're not quite as intentional. This one you will appreciate because the research participants were human resource people. And what they did is they took, and you've all done this, where you're looking through a stack of resumes and looking to see who you're going to call in. And they asked them to rank, how positive they were about this individual. And one group, they gave them a hot drink as to drink while they were going through it. And the others, they gave a cold drink. What the human resources professionals did not realize is they could care less about the interviews. What they were testing was, does physical warmth transfer to interpersonal warmth? And what they found is when they were holding a hot drink, they rated the candidates higher than when they were holding a cold drink. Think about it. So when I give this thing to a general audience, I'll say, so the next time you go for an interview, take your interviewer a latte. But we all, especially as recruiters, we try to make everything as even as possible. But it shows that no matter what we try to do, there's always going to be that level of unconscious going on, which is okay. It happens to all of us. But there are things you can build in to say, now, is the reason I really like this candidate because they remind me of my best friend? Or, there are things that we can do. There was another study that was done at the University of Toronto between 2004 and 2009. And what they did was they looked through all the interviews of people applying to med school. Okay, and there were it was close to 3,000, and these were face-to-face interviews. And they were trying to, weed out all the different control variables. And so then after they had done that, then they checked to see what the weather was that day. And of course, Toronto in the spring, it can be sunny one day and rainy the next day. And what they found out was that being interviewed on a rainy day was the equivalent of losing 10% of your MCAT score, just with the weather. And you probably know that weather can affect you. And so it's like, but this is not life and death, but a life-changing decision. Now, 10% on your MCAT score, if you're gonna get in, you're probably gonna get in anyway, but their scores on those interviews were like that. So again, just that we are human beings and we are affected by our environment. Another thing that's been studied a lot is how we're affected by our hand dominance and our side dominance, whether we're right-handed or left-handed. And there have been quite a few studies that show that we favor our dominant side, to the point that when you look at the way you set up your desk, if you're right-handed or left-handed, and what's more important, and we have a tendency to favor things on our dominant side. There was a really interesting study done, and I've been trying to watch the presidential candidates, but I haven't drawn any real conclusions from this election cycle. But in 2004 and 2008, there were a group of researchers that studied. John Kerry was running against George Bush. And then in 2008, you had McCain and Obama. Well, McCain and Obama are both left-handed, and Kerry and Bush are both right-handed. So what they did is they studied what they said, and they studied actually over 3,000 different statements by these candidates. And what they found out is if you're right-handed and you want to make a positive statement, like there's hope in America, we're putting the place back to work, if you're right-handed, you would gesture with your right hand. If you want to say we're going to hell in a handbasket and it's my opponent's fault, you would, and you were right-handed, they gestured with their left hand. And so just that kind of subtle things that I prefer stuff. I have 2 dogs, and I took the younger one to some training because he's still jumping on everybody. He's 2 years old. And the class I went to, the lady's fascinating, but she let us know, your dog is right-handed or left-handed. And I go, you're kidding. But I started watching, and Toby always goes with his left paw, I'm sorry. He's my baby. But he goes with his left paw. And he is definitely left-sided. So, this is just a physical characteristic that probably most mammals probably have, and it has to affect us. Okay, now, if I just ask you to read this, most likely you say ABC. But if I said that, you'd say 12, 13, 14. So is it B or is it 13? It depends on the context. And we do this automatically all the time because it saves us time. If we had to totally analyze everything as we went through our day, we'd never get farther than the bathroom. And so it's very helpful to take these kind of shortcuts. And one way we do it is we look at the context, what's around us. This is how we teach children to read, besides phonetically, is you ask them, okay, even if you don't know a word, look at what it's saying in the sentence and maybe you can figure out what's going on. Well, we do it all the time. And a lot of times it's helpful, but sometimes it's not helpful, especially when you think of people, that if we judge somebody by the context they're in versus really judging them. And it may happen to you, maybe I meet a lot of people and I'll know, and I'm really good at faces. I'm not so good at names. But if I see somebody out of context, like I'm used to seeing them at my grocery store, you know, they're the lady behind who I give my laundry to. If I see her someplace else, I may not know her, or it takes me a minute until I place her in the appropriate context, I don't know them. Well, that's great, but sometimes people can be in a bad context, and so then we make judgments about them. Now, the other thing we make judgments about is based on our prior knowledge. Now, except for the fact that you know I'm trying to trick you, if we weren't doing this, which table looks longer and which looks wider? The one on the left obviously looks longer. Now, I did not, you know, play with this or manipulate it at all, but watch. They're exactly the same size. And you're not going to believe me, and you're going to think that, hey, wait a minute. But, you know, you can measure it. The reason is we all understand perspective. And so this is a two-dimensional surface, but you're seeing it in 3 dimensions. And so you're making that leap to, in real life, that table would be going that way, so it would be longer. So sometimes our eyes will remember how things should be, and then we make mistakes that way also. So how does this get down to then why we make such big mistakes sometimes in judgment? And you see this everywhere. I don't know how researchers eventually came up with the fact that at any one time we're exposed to 11 million pieces of information, but I'll take their word for it that it's a lot, okay? So let's just look at this room and what we're seeing. There's probably 11 million. There's a little pink light in that projector that's coming out. There's a little blue thing on, I assume it's the fire thing there. There's the exit sign. There's the wording there. I mean, if each of those is a piece of information, then we probably do have 11 million. So we all start out being exposed to the same pieces of information. But what happens then is what we perceive is going to filter out a lot of that. And part of it might be, I'm standing, you're sitting. Some of you are facing the sun, some of you are facing in. So what we actually perceive gets filtered. And then how we interpret that. Perhaps, you know, bright lights give you a headache. So that's another level that we have all these different lenses. And then our preferences. I hate being up this early in the morning, perhaps. Not me, I actually like early morning. But, or I had a bad night last night, or I just prefer sitting in the back instead of sitting in the front, and now I'm in the front, so I'm uncomfortable. All those things, and then what we actually pay attention to. The point is out of these 11 million pieces of information, you are probably taking in 40 or 50 at any time. And even those you might not be totally consciously aware of. But what's the likelihood that you and I are taking in the exact same 40 to 50 pieces of information? We're not. Okay, so in actuality, we are experiencing this moment in time differently from the person next to us. And that's just human nature, that's okay. But the point is, we need to be aware of it, because we tend to think that the way we experience the world is the same as everybody else. And oftentimes, now if you take this to a bad degree, we assume when other people experience the world differently and perhaps tell us about it, that they're wrong. And because the way we perceive the world is the right way. And it's really fascinating. Now, I really want to focus on unconscious bias as it relates to organizations and hiring decisions. But there's tons of really interesting books out there on these kind of cognitive mistakes we made. So I give these 3 books. The first one, if you are, especially within an organization, this makes a really good book club reading. Before I left Woodman, before I retired, I was in charge of strategy. So I made all our executives read Decisive, and each meeting, one of them would report on a chapter. And it really talks about how decisions are made and some of the faulty logic that goes into it. And we actually used it to kind of analyze a decision that we had made a few years ago. And we're like, wow. And it gives some really practical hints. So it's not about unconscious bias really, but people, but it's about decision making and how organizations sometimes get it wrong. So that's a really good one. The paradox of choice is a fun one, and it's really more about individuals, but it's about how we make decisions. Personal decisions like, what DVD player to buy or how much we're willing to spend on something. And it tells you why your brain's doing that. And spoiler alert, it's not rational. We are not that rational. Then if you are following the politics of the last few years at all, The Righteous Mind is a great read. It's by a man named Jonathan Haidt, and it's why good people are divided by politics and religion. And it doesn't matter which really side, and I hate to say side, but end of the spectrum you are on politics and religion and morality and all those things. Most likely, especially the last few years, it's hard to look at anybody on the other end of the spectrum and not think they're either an idiot or a jerk, because the media has pretty much polarized that, both ends of the spectrum. But this gets into the evolutionary reasons of why. Why are people liberal? Why are I don't even like the labels, but why are people liberal? Why are people conservative? And it really gets into, again, we are experiencing different worlds depending upon, and a lot of they're saying now, whether or not you are conservative or liberal is actually genetic. Whether some of the different built-in traits we have would cause us to lean more one way than the other. So I give those because kind of I'm not going to spend a lot of time on just cognitive biases. We're going to talk about people, but those are great if you are interested in them. So there is a reason we have bias, and it served a very important historical purpose. Our ancestors, when they were presented with a dangerous animal, such as a snake, most likely, and probably somebody had gotten killed or bitten or whatever. And so what would happen is it was very healthy to just kind of brand all snakes bad. And so instead of, saying, now that's probably a good snake, I better wait around and make sure I don't, be mean to him. Most likely people just ran, they knew snakes were bad, and they would better be safe than sorry. Okay, now the problem is, so that's kind of a built-in thing, because the person who ran away from the snake lived to procreate. The one who didn't. And so we have had this generations of built-in bias towards, okay, I'm not going to stick around to see, I'm going to better be safe than sorry. And so we still have that where we may have a bad situation or a bad experience, and then we're going to generalize that to people who may fit into a category. And sometimes we don't even have to have a bad experience. We can see something or hear something on TV or the media that paints it as bad, and then we extrapolate. And that's really where stereotypes come from. The other human characteristic that we have that can lead to unconscious bias is I read somewhere that rather than being called Homo sapiens or human beings, we should be called Homo categorius, because a really unique human function is our ability to create categories. And it's kind of like we're going to put all snakes in the bad category. We're going to put all of this. Now, this ability to categorize allows us to get through the day. But, and we see it with children. They over-categorize. One of my favorite examples is when my older daughter was only a toddler, 2 years old. And I mean, we lived in Omaha, but we were out on the interstate, heading to Colorado. And if you've made that long, boring drive, there's some cattle fields or cattle feedlots out there in western Nebraska. And we were going by one with all these cows. And she said, "Look, Mommy, big doggies." She had never seen that many of, and of course, 4 legs from a distance, there were lots of doggies. Now, eventually, she learns to start having some discrimination there, that no, not everything with 4 legs is a dog. But that ability to categorize, we never lose, and if we don't question it, we can categorize people the same way based on our experiences. Okay, I'm going to show you a video, a very short one, and many of you have probably seen it. I still want you to watch it, it's only a couple minutes, and follow the instructions.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla?
Did you?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
How many of you have seen that video before, or something like it? Okay, see, I almost didn't put that in because back in the early 2000s, I'm showing my age here a little bit, but that was circulating a lot, and the early diversity years. But then as I was talking to people, they say, well, no, I haven't seen that. So if you had not seen the video, raise your hand if you saw the gorilla. Okay, so probably about half. Now, raise your hand if you noticed the curtain changing color. 2. 3. Raise your hand if you saw the player in black leaving. A couple. I still never see the player in black, even though I'm waiting for it, and I think it's because I'm watching the gorilla doing that. But it shows, and this is a really good example of, when something does happen and it's all over the news, and there's eyewitness accounts, and different people see totally different things. Part of it is, it's all based on that perception thing, what gets through our filters. And the thing is if you're looking for certain things, you're going to see them. And if you're not looking for certain things, you literally don't see it. And so your reality, you can be 100% accurate that you saw this. And that's why they've really proven that eyewitness testimony is pretty unreliable. So there was another case, and I know this is kind of a strange slide, but it's a scan of a lung. So some people decided to do some more research, and they gave this scan of a lung in a stack of others to over 100 radiologists. And these were radiologists who were looking for lung cancer, okay? And so they went and did all this, and out of only 14% of those radiologists noticed, and probably from the back you can't see it, there's a gorilla in the lung. Yes, from back there. I say it, the slides are better in the front. But yes, and that image of a gorilla is 14 times larger than the cancer that radiologists will find. So the radiologists didn't even see it, even though it was huge. The reason is, who's looking for a gorilla in a lung? So, you know, what radiologists are looking for and what we want them to look for is cancer. But these are highly intelligent, highly educated, highly trained, and they didn't see something that's 14 times the size. Again, we see what we're looking for. And when it comes to people, we can make some mistakes. So another reason why we make these kinds of mistakes is either selective attention or inattentional blindness. So they're kind of flip sides of the same coin. Selective attention is what the radiologist does. You know, I am looking for something, and so it is helpful to screen out everything else. We pay attention to things that are important to us. A few examples I give. If you have ever been pregnant or wanted to be pregnant, have you ever noticed all you see is pregnant women and otherwise you don't? Or if you're in the market for a car, and maybe you've set your mind on a certain type of car. Oh, I want a Lexus. And then all of a sudden you see Lexuses everywhere. Again, that's selective attention. I give the example of a lifeguard. I lifeguarded when I was in college. And, you know, you got a pool full of screaming little kids all day long, and you get to where you don't even see them because what you're looking for is a disruptive pattern. And kids screaming and playing look different than children who are actually in trouble in the water. And so it's important, and it's a great skill that we have. Unfortunately, when we use selective attention, we can be, again, because of those perceptions, we can be focusing on things and not getting an accurate picture of our employees. Another one is inattentional blindness, where we don't see things because we don't need to. And this is where we can get into some problems. White people don't notice things that people of color notice. And one of the stories that really hit home for me, it was after Ferguson, and you know you're reading these accounts, and I was reading the account of the talk that black fathers have to have with their sons about how to, you know, not get in trouble for something. And one of the things, it was an article, and this man was saying one of the things that he told his son was always get the receipt. And what was interesting is, you know, nowadays with everything online and you put your card and you get the chip or whatever, people oftentimes ask, do you want a receipt? And half the time I'll say, no, it's just gonna take up room in my, and they're gonna email it to me anyway, it's gonna take up room in my purse. And the thing was that this father was giving advice to his son is always get the receipt, because as you are more likely to be followed in a store and asked, do you have a receipt? Because you might be suspected of shoplifting, whereas an older white lady wouldn't. Well, I don't have that, I haven't had that experience, so I don't pay attention to those kinds of things. Men don't notice things that women do. And if you ever call it out and say things, and we've got, well, not an equal mix here, but women, I'm speaking to you now, if you ever call out and say something that happened, have you had people say, oh no, that couldn't have happened? Or that, oh, you're too sensitive, or that's not what they meant, things. Well, if they haven't had that experience, then they can afford to be inattentionally blind. Heterosexual people don't notice things that LGBTQ people may notice. And it's just kind of that radar thing. And so if we haven't had that experience, we can be inattentionally blind. And we can also be insensitive. And so if associates come to you in HR with something, with a complaint, or with an observation, and that hasn't been your experience, sometimes it's hard to weigh, okay, just get really curious. Tell me about that. Because I haven't experienced it, and I hope our organization isn't creating a culture that makes you feel that way. But I need to find out more about it rather than saying it's not happening, because we can't say that. I want to show you a quick little video. It's kind of fun. And it really turns it, how many of you have heard of the term microaggression? Some of you, okay. Microaggression, the out and out discrimination, racist, sexist, ageist, ableist types of cruel comments and things hopefully don't happen in your organizations anymore. That doesn't mean that microaggressions don't happen. And what those are oftentimes the little unconscious things that kind of build up. Until after a point you say, really? But each one individually is not a big deal. And so this is from MTV, so I will warn you a little bit ahead of time. But I think it's really shows when we flip it on its ear.
So you're not good at golf, but you're white. People of color have to deal with racial microaggressions every single day. So microaggressions are those little unintentional insults that we see people of color as stereotypes. Which got me thinking, what if white people had to deal with racial microaggressions?
So like, where are you from?
No,
Like, where are you really from?
why do you have an accent? Like a Swedish accent.
You know, your English is really, really good. It's like I can't even tell you have an accent or anything.
I don't have an accent.
No, that's what I'm saying. You don't speak English.
You don't speak German?
Can you say a curse word European?
You know, like, what does that even mean?
Hey Connor, you know about NASCAR stuff, right? Can you take a look at this?
Can you teach me how to line dance?
Play banjo?
Act entitled in the supermarket. Love white food. No real flavor to it. Never enough that tongue.
You're so exotic.
How do you keep your hair like that? I love how it's so limp. Ew, why does it feel like that? Oh my god, so it just does that? No, you are really pretty for a white girl.
Your eyes are so brown.
You know what you look like? Kenny Chesney. Zach Braff.
Emma Stone.
Rachel Maddow.
My friend Chad. Maybe you know him, because he's white too.
No, Emma Watson.
Not Macklemore. What's the other guy?
Is it Emma Thompson?
It's C-H-A-D, like Chad.
One of the Emmas. You look like an Emma.
You know who you look like? I bet you hear this all the time. Jeffrey Dahmer. How you look like a token white guy. Hey, Connor, can we get a white perspective on this? I love everything about white culture. You guys are like so fun. What do you mean you don't listen to Creed? You're white.
You've never tried that. But you're white.
You don't act like a normal white person.
You're not really white though.
I'm really white. I'm whiter than you are.
So, did all your ancestors own slaves?
No, but of course he wishes that he could still own slaves. That's a part of his culture.
Right, back me up on this one. The thing you have to understand about white
No,
culture
I'm
is that
from
white
a
people are...
historically white college. So I
Okay,
know
but
about
I
the
backpacked
culture.
in Europe, so can you see how ridiculous this was? I know. Story of my life. If you've ever experienced microaggressions because of your race, gender, sexuality, or body type, go ahead and vent about it in the comments.
Can you teach me how to like take a really popular rap song and like make it a ukulele song? It's so cool. I think it's so cool how you guys do that.
Okay, pretty, oops. Don't want that. Okay. Silly, but it does kind of show the things that happen. A couple examples from real life. My last name is Hernandez. That's my married name. My husband is Mexican-American. What is interesting is how many people have asked me before, once they say, oh, you don't look Mexican, and then they'll say, where's your husband from? And I'll say, Lincoln. And they'll say, no, where's he really from? He was born in Lincoln. Well, where are his parents from? And I go, well, his dad was born in Scottsbluff and his mom was born in Illinois. And I know where they're going, and they may be totally just, they want to find out your ethnicity. But when you assume that you can't be from America or the United States unless you have a European sounding name, then it's those kinds of things that build up. A while back, one of my daughters had to have some tests done, and we went to the hospital, have them done, and she was going to have some anesthesia for it. And so, you know, they put you in that little prep room, and I was with her, and she had gone to the restroom. So I'm just sitting there on my phone doing email, and this man comes in, and he's in scrubs. He's got a sheet of paper in front of him. He doesn't introduce himself to me. He just looks at me and says, oh, you're the interpreter? And I didn't quite hear him. And I was like, what? And he goes, and again, it wasn't a question, it was a statement. You're the interpreter. And I said, no, I'm the mother. And then, oh, she speaks English? And at that moment, my daughter walks back in. She had not heard this conversation, and, you know, with her heavy Omaha accent. And, and it ends up, it's the anesthesiologist. Well, at that point, his whole demeanor changes. He introduces himself to her, shakes her hand, and they proceed, talks about where she went to college, where she worked, what she was doing, and went in this total explanation of what the procedure was going to be. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm thinking, what if she didn't speak English? What if I was the interpreter? Would we have had the same experience? And I don't think so. But again, as a white person who has not experienced that kind of thing, except vicariously through my husband, then it would be very easy for me to assume that stuff doesn't happen. So that is one thing we always, one of my favorite speakers, maybe some of you know her, is Cy Wakeman. And one of the things she always told me, she coached me earlier on, is the minute you start judging, you quit learning. And the whole thing of just stay curious. And so when people come to you to say things that are going on or talk about their experiences, just get really curious about it, because it's amazing what we may learn. Another thing where in our ability to judge people, context becomes really important. And that is, if you looked at this fellow, you would probably make some judgments about him. And that's okay, we do it all the time. You would probably make some judgments about his social status, his education, and some other things. Same guy, what if he looked like this? And this is actually from Undercover Boss. So that's the whole, if you've ever seen that show, that's the whole premise of the show, is that the head guy, the boss, goes undercover and sees what it's really like in his or her organization. And if you saw him, you would make some judgments based on how he's dressed, his haircut, just his whole demeanor. And not only would you make some judgments about that, but you would probably treat him differently, maybe even unconsciously, even if intentionally, you treat everybody the same. Those things are going to happen. There was another experiment that was done that was really interesting. And this if you've ever been in big cities and on the street or in the subways, people will perform and they'll have their case out there and you throw in some dollars. Well, they did one and they filmed it. There was this guy there and he's playing it, et cetera, et cetera. And it was in the DC Metro. And very few people, this was one of the few, stopped to listen to him. Of course, they're in a hurry. And what is kind of our unconscious assumption when we see somebody like that? Oh, new artist just starting out, trying to get some gigs, trying to get some money. Well, actually, that was Joshua Bell. And he is a world famous violinist. People pay $250 for tickets. That violin that he was playing in the Metro subway was a $350,000 Stradivarius. But again, the context that we see people in will cause us to value some people more than we value others. Now, another thing with context, and again in the back you may have difficulty, I want to show you how context works too. Look at this list of words. Everybody, okay? Okay, which word or words were not on the first list? Kitchen. Anything else? Kitchen and sleep were not on the first list. People always get kitchen. Why? It doesn't fit, okay? Because the context is all about sleeping, so it doesn't fit. What's interesting then is even the context how it relates to bias is you can prime people to think about things in a certain way. And psychologists will do this when they're doing a research experiment. They will prime people to have something top of mind and then to see how people react. Well, there was an experiment, and this is sad, about internalized bias and priming. And what happened is they took a group of Asian American women who were college students, and they divided them into 3 groups, and they gave them a math test, okay? Now with the first group, they just had to put their name on it. That was the control group. The second group, they had to put their name and their race. And then the third group, they had to put their name and their gender, okay? Now, what is the stereotype about Asians and math? They're good at it, okay? And what is the stereotype about women in math? They're bad at it, okay? Now the thing is, these women know they're Asian, and they know they're women, but just that little reminder of them that you're Asian and they had to write it down, and that you're a woman and you had to write down female. The average score from the control group of people who just put their name down was like 80. The group who had to write down that they were Asian, their average score was like 85. So just reminding themselves that they're Asian, Asians are good at math, boom, I do better. The other group who were reminded they were women got in the 70s. So that is so, but just the stuff that is in our atmosphere and the stereotypes, not only do we internalize them, but even if we are a member of that category, we internalize them. And there is, I don't think I have internet here, I didn't ask for that. How many of you have ever, I'll go on to this one, have ever done the test Project Implicit? Okay, a couple of you. The rest of you do this. Now, all you have to do is go to Google Project Implicit, okay? And you will get the original Harvard test. Now, there's a more fun version, especially if you want to do it with some of your associates or whatever. It works really well, and it's there, and it's www.lookdifferent.org. And that's really all you have to do, and then you can get into a bunch of things. But it's the What Can I Do Implicit Association test. We don't have time to do it today, but it's really fun. I did it with a group of Creighton students and actually brought somebody forward, and they did it online. And they have a race and a gender one. Now, if you go to Project Implicit, the Harvard site, they have age, they have, I think, sexual orientation, they have ability and disability type things. And it really, people get really upset when they see their results. But you have to realize we're not saying that intentionally anyone acts in a discriminatory way, but it's how quick you associate certain words with certain people. And the overall examples at the Harvard site is on gender. 76% of people who take this test, including women, more readily associate males with careers and females with family. Now, you may be the most feminist, professional. I mean, I associate men with careers and females with family, okay? And it's not saying that intentionally or consciously that's what I believe, but you cannot live in our society and absorb media and certain things without having it affect you. 70% more readily associate male with science and female with the arts. Even though, you know, you can be a doctor and take this as a woman and still have this happen. And actually 75% of people have an implicit preference for white people over black people. And this includes black people. And 6% of people have a preference for able-bodied people. So if we say, I hate when I hear people say, oh, I don't see color, or I'm colorblind, or I'm this. I am sorry. For one thing, that's very rude. You're taking away somebody's identity. But to say that you are not impacted by what you see is wrong. And if you need to prove it to somebody, have them take this test. There was a test, and I know I need to get going here pretty quickly, but this is just out, and it was a really interesting, and for those of you who get emails from people, I'm going to read this to you. This email was sent out to over 8,500 professors across the country at private and public universities, and what it said was, Dear Professor, I'm writing you because I am a prospective doctoral student with considerable interest in your research. My plan is to apply to doctoral programs this coming fall, and I'm eager to learn as much as I can about research opportunities in the meantime. I will be on campus next Monday, and although I know it is short notice, I was wondering if you might have 10 minutes when you would be willing to meet with me to briefly talk about your work and any possible opportunities for me to get involved in your research. Any time that would be convenient for you would be fine with me, as meeting with you is my first priority during this campus visit. Thank you in advance for your consideration. Same email was sent to all 8,500 professors. The only difference was the name. And the name, there was one that was very obviously white male, like Brad Anderson. Okay. Then there were female names and then different ethnicity names, etc. They were not testing whether or not they got an appointment. They were testing, did they get a response? Did they even respond to the email? And it's depressing. Now, don't worry about reading this screen, but basically if the line is white males, this is how fewer people got, whether they were black female, black male, Hispanic female, Chinese, Indian, etc. Now, what's interesting is at public schools, so say like University of Nebraska, women did better a little bit. Caucasian females, black females, and Hispanic females, actually those are the ones above the line. So it's not all bad news, but at private schools, look, invariably it's below the line. Another thing that was really interesting is depended on what school you were in. The worst was business. And what that means is if, and they put women and people of color together because it was fairly similar for this chart. But on the left-hand side, if 62% of women and people of color at least got a response, 82% of white males got a response. Okay, so, and that's in business, and then it works all the way down. The only place is if you're going in the fine arts. If you're a white male going in the fine arts, good luck, because there is a bias against you in that one. But in some of the other findings that were really weird, I found interesting, higher paid faculty were much more likely to not respond to minorities and females than lower paid faculty. I really don't know what conclusion to draw from that. And this is the part that really surprised me, there were no benefits to women of contacting female faculty, nor to Black or Hispanic students of contacting same-race faculty. So the women were just as likely to turn down women as the men were, and same of same race. And it said that female scientists are just as biased against female job applicants as male scientists. So don't just assume that you don't carry biases because you happen to fit into a certain category. So when you're not part of the in-group, what do? You cover. And this is and I've given you some, I think, good resources from a place. And also, as we won't have time to go through everything in great detail, I've also given you a card. It does have all my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. I just love to get examples and things, or if you would like to visit more about this. And on the back, I always like to give you some resources so you have some things to take away. These, the other handouts I gave you were taken from a place called catalyst.org. It's a great place to get some things. And then this whole topic of covering is from a man, and it's in there, but his name, I think, was Yoshi. It's on the back. I'll grab it. Oh, no, Kenji Yoshino and Christy Smith. And there is a great video, which we won't have time to look at, but a great resource for women's issues particularly is Stanford's Clayman Center for Gender Research. And they have videos you can download and use, and they have a great one on this topic of covering. And covering is basically when you feel that, oh, I'd fit in better, I'd be more successful if I looked like them, acted like them, were like them. And some things we can't change about us, so we're just going to cover up some things. This oftentimes happens with people who feel that if they talk a lot about their families, they'll be seen as not committed to their careers. And so they'll kind of, cover up that part of them. Or some other things. Now, people cover because they feel they need to. Nobody tells them, but people learn very quickly that if I'm going to be successful here, I'm going to need to talk in a certain way, behave in a certain way, and if I don't, then I'm not going to be as successful. So I will do what I can to fit in. The problem is, depending on how much you have to do this, it can be really energy sucking. And it can also be soul sucking. So people cover a number of different ways. One, they'll change their appearance as much to kind of fit the standard, fit the mold. And some of this is not bad. If you have a certain brand your organization is projecting and people need to kind of dress in a certain way, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you really have to pretend to be somebody you're not, then that can be a problem. Affiliation base. So I pretend, that I'm really not part of that group because I realize that may hurt my career. Advocacy base, and you see this, there's a lot of research on women. In fact, I have a whole presentation on women supporting women or not. And one of the reasons that sometimes you see women not supporting other women or people not supporting another person of their race or ethnicity is because it's like, ooh, I may not make it on that track if I'm seen as, a raging feminist or something. I'll cover that part up and I'll just kind of blend in because that works. And then the last one is association-based. Many years when I was at Woodman in the sales and marketing division, I was the only woman. And we would have a big state managers meeting once a year. and we would, and oftentimes I was the only woman there. After a few years, there were more women there, but I remember one time there were like maybe 3 or 4 women out of 100, okay? And we happened to hit the coffee machine at the same time at the conference, and one of the state managers walked by and said, "What are you girls plotting?" You know, the idea that if you hang out with your own kind, that somehow you're not going to be mainstreamed and part of the group. Everybody covers in some way, and as I said, it's not necessarily bad. And here are the individual groups, and unfortunately, and I think you can see based on what's happening in the news, lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals are those who have to, and transgender, are those who have to cover the most because it's not as accepted. But even straight white men have to cover. What if you don't like golf and you're in a corporate setting where everybody likes golf? What if you don't like football? What if you don't like, you know, the things that may be in the prevailing mode? So we all do it. But research has shown that if you have to do it too much, it hurts. It hurts your sense of self. And if you have associates who are having to do that, that means they're not bringing their whole self to work. So not all forms of covering are negative. I'm not going to show that video. So how do we ensure our organizations are inclusive? We examine our houses, just like we did at the beginning, for elements of exclusion and to level the playing field. We acknowledge we all have bias. We become aware of our individual biases, become aware of our organization's bias, and then we work to level the playing field. Everybody in your company is responsible for the first 3. You especially are responsible for the 4th one, and that is leveling the playing field, and that's why I gave you some of these resources. There are, so on individual, I like this cartoon. Big old fish comes by and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the boys go, "What's water?" We don't even realize our culture because we live in it all the time. And especially if the culture is comfortable for us. If it's not comfortable for us, it's somewhat like putting a freshwater fish in a saltwater tank and wondering why it's not thriving. Okay? You may have a culture of one or the other, and if it's not something where everyone can thrive. So I'm not going to go over these too much because you have them in your handout. But to become aware of our corporate biases, do you tend to like to hire from certain schools? Do you tend to hire from certain backgrounds? Do you tend to take from personal references? And these can all be valuable, but they can also keep out some candidates. In recruiting, you know, look, and I will tell you, the best book for human resource professionals would be the one, Everyday Bias, on the back there. It's on that little card. They have a section in the back that's an appendix, and it has a checklist of whether it's sourcing, job descriptions, interviewing, hiring, specific things you can do, an organization can do to level the playing field. And things like, and maybe you already do some of this, taking the names off of the resumes and the things before you give it to the hiring manager. To some places are even taking off the names of schools. And I was visiting with some folks at Creighton in their HR area, and they said, "Oh, that would be fascinating," because when they get things from UNL, you know, it's like, well, they're not Creighton, you know. Some of them would have that assumption. And so who are you leaving out of your hiring pool? When you bring people on, the entire talent life cycle, onboarding and sponsorship, who gets those, and you know, how valuable they are. Looking at assessment, there's a new study out right now, and I know you probably look at performance reviews all day long, and I know in our organization we would calibrate them across, and what they have found out is that women receive much less specific feedback than men do, and that can hurt your career, and it's usually about communication style. Like, they need to learn to get along better, or they need to not be so brusque. Whereas the kind of helpful feedback, it would really be helpful if they learned this new computer language and got this certification so they can work on these kind of projects. So, and then recognizing and developing, but in that book. So there are even now, I don't know any of you are using them, there's software out now that can do your recruiting and interviewing for you. And of course, this is coming out of Silicon Valley. But there was a cool article in there and saying an algorithm can hire better than a human because humans have all this bias. And they talk about some of the things. There's one tool called Guild. And what they do, they will search through all the resumes and on the online applications, and they don't have that human bias. And then finally, there is some software out there that will go through your job descriptions and your job postings, because some job descriptions are not going to attract certain target audiences. And so that's really interesting to look through and see, you know, why do we never get a wider application pool for this job? And it's not just that they aren't out there, but people look at those and say, it's probably not for me. And then again, the handouts that I've given you. There is so much good information out there, and I try to always leave you with something you can take away, because I know I cover a ton of information in a very brief amount of time. But at this point, and I think I've gone over, I will turn it back to Terry and to close up for the morning. Thank you.